Yeah, I don't know how much David will. I mean, I imagine some of these things David will cover in his presentation or chat. But one of them was about sort of the interest, like what seems to be a growing interest in using black soldier fly as food rather than feed. And I think initially the interest was very much, you use black soldier fly for animal feed. But I have seen a couple of people mention that, they'd found a way to make them as really tasty food. And I saw that sort of coming from a couple of different places. So I was wondering whether that's, something that you had considered, and whether it was desirable or possible, or whether there was an even greater yuck factor, with black soldier fly than there was with other insects. And my other question is about manure and excrements. I mean, personally, I'm really interested in the kind of circularity element of the insect story. I think that's why I became really interested in this in the first place. And so I'd really like to know, I mean, I know you've been doing a lot of work on that in South Africa with your one of your subsidiaries. And so I'd love to know how that can be scaled up, and what sort of obstacles we face in sort of more tightly regulated markets like the EU.
Shall I climb straight into those?
Whilst we're waiting for Nick, I know you were going to do a presentation, but with not so many people here, and
I haven't quite planned a presentation. Nick said he was going to ask me some questions, which I'm really good at answering questions. So
well, there's two to start with.
There's two to start with. So great. So the first one is food. So Emily, insects as food is a thing and a market. I'm speaking slowly because I'm not a massive fan. I think it has its place, like caviar does.
Okay.
And it's a speciality thing that you might get at a restaurant, and it's nice and it's quirky, and it's interesting. So that's as an insect that you can see. Then there's a piece on historically some groups in the world that may have, in small parts of their culture, an insect eating background. And I say that because I get really cross when they say, yeah, but Africa, everyone eats insects. They really don't.
No, they don't.
They really don't. I have 4 young boys, and they are the first 3 are triplets. And when they were 1, they would sit on the kitchen floor and they would eat fricking any insect that walked past. But and that was in Africa. But it's not much broader than that. And they, of course, there is maponi worms, and there is a culture that there are parts of Kenya, and there are bits of Africa where it's eating insects is somewhere between a treat or a bit of fun, but it's rarely, for the last many decades, has it been part of a staple diet. Similarly, in Asia, there are bits of it. So I'm not a massive fan of using it as a nutritional source for developing nations, because I think that chickens are also quite good bioconverters, not as good as insects perhaps, but and really want to have their staple diet, if they can afford meat, as chicken. That said, I think there is a market, depending how the world changes over the next years, as a low value meat alternative. And if that's using insects in hamburgers where you're not particularly sure what's underneath it, that's great. I love a veggie burger. I've pretty much given up hamburgers, because if it's a really good burger with lots of sauce, if it's vegetables or meat in it, doesn't really bother me. In fact, it doesn't bother me at all. I'd rather have the veggies. And if it was insects, I'd also be very pleased with that. So I think also in some places where if you can get the insect meal cheap enough, which we're certainly a long way away from now, you might use it as a meat source. When I was at school, we used to have these terrible things called, they're now quite posh in French restaurants, but they're the coquettes, you know, and there was this thin line of brown crap in the middle that you never dared ask what it was, because someone might be able to tell you. And I would much rather that was made out of insects than whatever terrible stuff they fed it to us in our very cheap school lunches. But so I think as an ingredient, where it's in a lasagna, great. If you can get it cheaper, then you could do its meat alternative, or if its environmental impact would that much better. But as a wholesale ingredient is where I see it. That's my food piece.
Is that like a flour or a just an additive?
Yeah, effectively, a rehydrated meal, effectively. Yeah.
Because this is what is there anything that insect meal or food or protein does better than what we have at the moment? An example would be, does it make bread rise better? Does it make oils coalesce better? Is there some specific advantage in insect, or is it just competing against other sorts of protein?
So there are certainly parallels that we could take, and I'm too stupid to understand those, that we could take from our work on other monogastric animals like us. That's things with one tummy, and we know the positive impacts it has on chickens, for example, and pigs, and we could probably draw conclusions for that into humans. However, where our human diet, in this personal opinion, is so much driven by affordability and what we actually want to eat rather than what we're forced to eat in a chicken farm, I think it's probably less relevant. And you can find those nutrients that you need by eating maybe what you'd like to eat, unless it comes down to a financial piece where you need the protein and this is a good source of it and here's the cost base for it. But I would rather have a very high broccoli or a pak choy or something than a cheap meat. That's my personal preference, and I think a lot of people that have that economic ability to decide would probably follow suit. So that's my food world, but there's lots of great stuff, and don't forget that it wasn't very long ago that if you had really no cash in parts of Europe, you ate oysters, right? So let's not think that we may not globally get into a situation, let's hope we don't, where we look to insects or other sources because of necessity. And through history, as I said, oysters in Ireland during the terrible times there were the only way of getting some animal food, animal proteins into people's bodies. And of course, now oysters are super posh. So just because I find it more akin to caviar doesn't mean we all won't be eating it in the future. So just not quite on my vision. And then, Emily, your other question was about manures. So just to be really clear, what we do at AgriProtein or the Insect Technology Group, we are very active at looking at manures, and that's separate to human fecal stuff. Human fecal stuff is really very, very futurology for us. That's right. Really way down the line. Okay. And there are awesome opportunities for it. And funny enough, manure and human fecal matter are pretty good because they're very known. There's not much differences in them, funny enough, which is why they're able to test quite quickly at the moment whether there's COVID in various areas in the UK or this, that, the other, because shit, when you put it all together, is roughly the same stuff. Not exactly. And there's differences at the individual level, of course, but it's also a great source of stuff that's being chucked away. And, you know, all of us on this call here have probably 220 grams of stuff that we could be feeding to insects in our bellies. Or if you're a vegetarian, 240 grams, because, yep, vegetarians poop more. That's the gig. So that's way down the line. I see it as an opportunity, twofold. Having spent the last 20 years in Africa, I am very dubious of any solutions that are driven for Africa that aren't first world solutions. So the idea of, oh, it's great, we can put it in a container. That's always the start of any sort of European research program into Africa. It's got to go in a container. I don't know why, it's become the thing. And then the next one is, yeah, we don't actually do it here, but we think it'll be all right for the guys in Africa. And that drives me nuts. So one of the things we've been looking at is how do we get posh solutions for human fecal matter usage. And there's a couple of examples that we've worked with. One is with island tourism. So Bermuda and Mauritius, where it could be a superb solution because you don't have the frass, or you don't have the soils to be able to grow vegetables in, and you need to get rid of lots of poop. And I love the idea that if it works in those posh locations, then we could backward engineer a solution perhaps for Africa. The difference being, and also the other one we looked at, which is really interesting, this was quite a while back, working with a property developer in Aspen, Colorado, and they couldn't get their proposed new suite of skiing chalets onto a national grid of sewers. So what are the off-grid sewer solutions? And we looked at that. And so I love the idea, if it works there, then we could use it in Africa rather than trialing it in Africa and going, oh, it doesn't really work there. Probably won't use it here. So that's my preferred way of running it. But that's really out there in the future stuff, is the human fecal matter. But manure, that's awesome. That's right now. And there is really, the problems with manure are so known, because you know what you fed a pig and you know what you fed a chicken. So you know if it has problems with hormones in it, you know if it has problems with chemicals in it, and you just take that out of the process. So it's a very controllable substance to use as a feed. And we enjoy, and they grow delightfully on it. It's never a whole solution. It's normally 50% of a solution. After 50%, if you can use about 50% manures or human fecal matter, and then it starts to diminish the larval growth.
You mean as a substrate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never been a great sort of crack dealer, but I understand you can also sort of depurify cocaine to about 50% before the consumers start to get upset, and it's about the same with manures.
But less expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So have you? How far have you got with this Aspen ski resort?
Oh, it was just literally, it was about 5 years ago. It was a real conceptual piece, and it never came to anything. But it was just that. But the Bermuda piece came quite far, and some of the nation state islands are great, because islands work really well. They have problems of getting rid of waste, and they typically have very poor soil. Not always, but certainly not the UK. But I'm talking about sort of holiday hot, sitting around the equator type islands, and it's terribly expensive to bring fruit and vegetables in, which is also environmentally disastrous as well. So,
what would you do with the flies then? So you use the frass.
Yeah.
But what do you do with the flies? How do you process them? What do you use them for?
So the flies we only use for making eggs, but the larvae, you mean?
The larvae, sorry, yeah.
The larvae we could, I guess it depends on, so there's a number of things. On manures, there's really no reason why, with a little bit more research, it can't go back into the human feed chain. Via another animal. That's what on manures, and that's in the future. And again, there's caveats around that about what the manures have inside them before you feed them to the larvae, to make sure that there aren't any, you're not taking pigs that have high hormone levels or what have you. And then if you're on human fecal matter, the quick answer is, and it's really funny because people don't really care what you feed fur animals, i.e. mink and foxes. because they don't reproduce except the brood stock, and people somehow think it's ugly and nasty and they can eat shit-fed larvae. But if you take the same approach to dogs, people get a little bit more upset. But actually, it's pretty similar, right? Unless you're breeding dogs for crafts or something. So that's to even exist, crafts, I'm not sure it does. So there are non-food sources that are abundant. The economics of the business model works so well, however, that you don't really need to do very much with it. And in that case, you really are using the insects as a waste management tool.
Really? So just with the frass?
No, on the gate fees for taking the crap on.
Wow. So just the dumping fees. Amazing. Okay.
So you're not, and you can extract oil, right? So you can, and nobody minds. So bear in mind that a live larva is, any entomologists here, David, 40% fat, I think.
I don't know, but that sounds reasonable.
About 40% fat, I think. And so, and that's fine. No one minds whether you're WD-40, as long as it stops your gate squeaking. It doesn't matter if it's been fed on some fecal matter.
Is that what you use it for, the oil?
You can use it for anything. I've cooked with it for fun mostly. It's a novel thing to cook with it. Again, going back to the food piece, you can use it for. It's basically a lard. I don't know if you've ever seen. I've got some here. It looks like this. So this is fairly. Right. It looks like lard or butter.
Okay.
And if I put my hands on it and kept it warm for 5 minutes, it would look like olive oil. So it has a very low melting point. Very low solidifying point. And you can use it. It's like ghee. It's very similar to ghee that the Indians cook with. And so you could use it as a palm oil replacement. And there are all sorts of, and it's fantastic for laying chickens, for their egg development. But ultimately, there's always a market for industrial oils, which is not a very good revenue market, but it's always there. There's lots of companies that will take any type of oil that you have. And we just need to make sure that it's done sustainably.
Do you know any idea to which uses they put this oil?
So there's some mag oils or just general oils that are collected.
Just the insect-derived oils that you can.
Yeah, mostly in layer feeds. So chickens, chicken layer hens is the really the best place that we've seen it as a replacement for fish oil, which is too expensive. And there is, without doubt, it's not our world. We're a business wholesaler, but there's, when the fish meal industry had all this oil lying around, they very quickly found, cod liver oil and various other things that, like snake oil in the old days, that was solve the problem to every type of rheumatoid or arthritis or this, that, the other. But oils, of course, are just good. They're just fats, and fats are good for people in any case. So we should all eat some good fats. But in terms of animal nutrition, laying chickens is really great, and anything that's very small. And anything that's very small, as in small chicks, very good to small weaning piglets. It's expensive for pigs as they get older because they're big things, and the oil is quite expensive, and it has a natural base which the price can't fall below, which it becomes an industrial tallow or an industrial oil for.
You mentioned earlier that the market for excrement, for flies being raised on excrement, that's really futuristic. That's really far down the line. The work that you're doing on manures, how soon could that happen in Europe? Because I understand that at the moment there's a real sort of stumbling block in the legislation, but I wonder how much of a stumbling block there is behind the mentality as well to make that happen.
So it's only a regulatory perspective. From a technology perspective, we're there. And
how much political will is there to make it happen? I mean, I wonder from the regulators in the EU, what is their perception of this?
So it's on their horizon, because we work to put it on their horizon at the EU. It's not on today's. The legislative goal changes that we're working, and we're very aligned to IPIF, which is an organisation that we helped found 5-6 years ago. and the EU has been steady and not always fast, but steady in its application of new licenses, of new legislation. And the way it's rolled is, first of all, now you can feed pretty much any animal roughly on insect meal. So that was the first sort of breakthrough. And then the question is, what can you feed the maggots? And that's becoming the new focus. At the moment in the EU, it's quite a lot more restrictive than most places in the world, because the maggot is deemed a farmed animal in its own right, which is a little unusual because, well, it is, but it's deemed a farmed animal, which means you have to feed it stuff that you could feed to a horse or a dog or anything else. So we are actively working along the guidelines of IPIF, which we've helped develop with the European Commission, to try and increase the amount of substrates that can be used to feeding maggots. And the most important of that is to bring through the change on supermarket waste, which is a natural one, because and that's what we do under our circular organics business in Belgium. In the States, it's really much more open, the legislation. It's a much easier ride. They have much more circularity, including a program for feeding swill to pigs, which is back in place now, which was banned in Europe 15, 20 years ago.
So what do they feed to pigs?
Swill, so leftover food, supermarket stuff, leftovers from factories, food factories, and what have you. And so the next step is to bring the supermarket piece and restaurant wastes in to the EU, and then after that the manure step. But manure is very easy, because you know what's in it. It's always the same. If you're working with the same farm, the same stuff, you know what's in it. Supermarket waste is homogeneous, but it's not always the same, and it's very different at Christmas, and it's very different in summer. So there's a real ease about manures, which wouldn't surprise me if it ended up fast tracking some of it.
Really amazing. Okay, interesting.
So Emily's also mentioned frass a couple of times. Is there a market for frass as a fertilizer, or a use for that?
Yeah, frass is great stuff. Love frass. I was in South Africa on Friday in Cape Town at our factory there, and it's just, we've really nailed our production process down there, and we've always made product, but it's now really exciting as we're starting to make really, really good product. And the frass is just, it's loomy. Is that a word, Emily? You're a good, you must be a great speller. Is loomy a word, or did I make that up? So
that's a new one on me, but I'm not the gospel.
I think
maybe you mean loamy.
Loamy.
Yeah.
Like soil.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Thanks. So loamy. Loamy sounds better. It sounds like it's got some light as well as soil in it. Anyway, thanks.
Luminous.
Yes, actually. And it's wonderful. The market for frass is a little bit unusual because it really depends where you are. So if you are in Tokyo, you can sell it for a freaking fortune. And if you are just outside Dublin, when most of the country is built out of peat, it has much less value. So it's, and you can't transport it. Well, you can transport it, but it's it doesn't sit well with our circularity piece, doesn't sit well with our environmental piece. We can dehydrate it, pelletize it, and then transport it. But really, it's a regional play. So the market is strong. We had some extraordinary wins in Cape Town with the market in 2010 because there was lots of stadiums post the football that needed filling, and so they needed lots of flower beds and what have you at the state level. So that was always great, and you get some nice advantages from those. But steady markets are really the typical domestic and farming fertilizers and composts that we compete with.
So is it packaged as is, or is it mixed with something, or added, or 50% dilution again, or what? How does it come?
So we sell it to compost companies and fertilizer companies, because we don't have the skill set to take it to the next level. And they will do some work on the NPK treatment. They will do some homogenization checks to make sure that it all looks the same, smells the same. They will turn it and churn it. They might leave it for the, I'm on really thin ice here, for the good bacteria to multiply for a week, depending on temperature. The key from our perspective to get it market ready, and that's our market ready, not end market ready, is the amount of water in it. And again, that becomes quite a regional piece, because if you have an off-taker that's very near you and your product has a lot of water in it, it's fine, because the water is quite useful in South Africa, for example, and it would be in Saudi. If you're in a country that doesn't need the water, then you have to spin the water out, and that's quite expensive. And we take on that responsibility of dewatering it to a certain amount that it can at least be packaged straight away. So, but it's big volumes. It's not the largest revenues side of our business, but if you get it, it can be a really strong cost side. So it's because there's a heck of a lot of the stuff, you know.
So David, it's just a question on dewatering. So if you think about biosolids, for example, human biosolids and what they do in typical waste plants, so they'd usually use belt filters or filter presses and different things like that. Are you saying that you have to use a centrifuge to dewater frass?
No, we drop it. I'm on fairly thin ice here from an engineering perspective, but it has quite a long drop onto a mesh. And we take the first swipe out of it, so we're not taking just loads of water, and we'll take it. I can get that number for you, David. What level of water? Sorry, of what level of water content we take it down to, but we need to recover at least half the water, and also we reuse the water in our factory as well. So that was the filtering. But no, we don't centrifuge that. We do. We centrifuge all sorts of things. We spin off oil on the way in on our inbound substrates sometimes, depending on the waste stream. So we'll do some inbound centrifuging. We use centrifuge technology for separating our oil from our lava, but not on the frass.
So David Allen, you're in Myanmar, and
Yes.
David Drew made some comments about insect eating culture. Would you like to contrast your experience there with what he said?
Well, I think there's some people would say that insects are fantastic and they really love to eat them. So, you know, I mean, I'll say I've tried just about all of the insects available here, and some of them I really like, but some I'll say, I'm not so sure that I think I'm going to prefer a piece of fish or a piece of chicken to this. So if it comes down to an economic choice at some point in time, while I'm quite an advocate, I think I'm not convinced that it's a perfect solution yet, and I'm not even convinced that the insect protein is going to be interesting enough to the market for the amount of substitution that people are talking about. So I'm really interested in the economics, and one of the questions I posted in the chat box was a graph I pulled from Barclays report of about 2 years ago, where they showed 2017 versus 2019, I think, cost of cricket protein, cricket powder, basically. So I'm I'm very, very interested to know what do the learning curves. So, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with technology learning curves and the exponential rate of cost reduction of different things. And, you know, so that, I guess, this is coming from my chemical engineering background. So, you know, these sorts of things apply across almost every processing and large-scale production industry, and they usually follow an exponential decrease. And so we, you know, a prime example at present is we see that with the solar industry, with the cost coming down. So I'd really love to see at what sort of rate the costs of black soldier fly production are coming down. And I'm quite amazed that it seems extremely hard to get that sort of information, and I don't understand why. So it makes me think that, it must make people like me who've come from an engineering background think that there's something shady about the industry, and it's not simply a matter of the fact that technology and intellectual property is you know, really important to people. It's simply a case of, well, there's an absence of satisfactory industry cost information that people would typically use in their planning decisions. And I don't quite understand that well enough yet. So I'd love your comments on things like that.
David?
Yeah, really, a really pertinent question, David. There's three parts to it, so the first piece is nothing shady about the industry. I think people just aren't very brilliant at it sometimes. I think it's people's lack of brilliance rather than lack of covering anything up. But so the three parts are the following to our business. One is the sale price of your product, right? So that's comes into the metrics of it. And at the moment, there is such little supply of insect meal that everybody is able to charge superannuated pricing models and get great bang for their buck because the quantities are so small. You saw maybe last week, Nestle have started using some insect meal in Purina, their pet feed. Extraordinary low sniffs of it in terms of volumes, you know, really very, very low volume, but because there isn't the volume for that type of mass off-taker available. And so because it's desirable, because it's a unique selling point, the prices can be high at the moment from a business model perspective. And I think typically in Europe, you're seeing something along the about $3,000 to $4,000 a ton price range, which is about, if I look at those Barclays figures that you showed me there, it's about a tenth of those, although I do believe that the 2020 figures for those Barclays figures, I was talking to a cricket farmer, which is not my thing. I just happen to really like the guy. Chatting to him yesterday, and he was saying that the prevailing cost in Thailand is about $20 a kilo now. So soldier fly meal is significantly cheaper than that. But the medium term, where everybody is launching their business plans into, is to at scale, is to be somewhere along the lines of the fish meal pricing. And fish meal pricing has the following issues. One is that it's all over the show. It's up and down according to catches, according to what the Chileans have found, that there aren't any, the catches, the spawning season has happened poorly, and they'll just stop fish meal production. And that's one of the reasons that fish meal has been so unloved in the marketplace, is not just because it's got a high price and it's been going up exponentially for 10 years. It's because of the volatility of the price. And fish meal is used as a feed, and feed goes to farmers. And as one knows, farmers have a very difficult as the farmers are always telling us, they have a very difficult lives, and the one thing they can't deal with is up and down pricing. And so hence why soya and super soy have come into economic day and ruin the environmental day. And super soy is pretty interesting stuff. It's very powerful, it's very potent. And I'm not up on my current prices, but I think it was at the sort of $800-900 a ton. I may be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at that. And fish meal prices at sort of 1800s, and somewhere in there is your long-term average for a insect meal. Although there is a very long time that sustainability will allow north of $2,000 pricing, where novelty will allow north of $2,000 pricing, where access to a product that is very finite at the moment will allow that $2,000 pricing. So that's the price side. Then on the input side, you have really different regional costs or negative costs. So for example, where you can take in supermarket food waste, which you can't do in the moment in Europe, but you can do in the States, that is a negative price, or a negative cost rather. So we are paid to take that food. And some of the issues at the moment in this very nascent industry is that probably the only real full waste to insect meal facility in the world is sat in South Africa, where the inbound value of the waste receiving is much less, because there's less control over landfill. There is less penalties on, not none, but less penalties on organizations for getting rid of their spent organics. Although what we're seeing with the larger companies in South Africa is an internal drive from their own compliance agendas, and often quite frustrated people. We will get a phone call from somebody in Joburg saying, "Help me, friend, I need to get rid of all my organic waste to you from my factory, because some bloke in Switzerland has just said that we're going to be a zero to landfill company." And that's fine, because he sat in freaking Zurich and not in Africa. And I'm not going to say who that is, but you can probably join the dots of what large Swiss food manufacturer that might be. And so that's really tough, because those decisions don't always work at the remote sites, and a lot of those companies have very, very big production facilities in South Africa, in South America, and in emerging markets. So that's the inbound piece, and then so that varies between, in some countries you might get $50 a ton for your inbound receive, and in some countries you might get next to nothing. And David, back to your question about where those difficulty in getting those numbers come in, that's because in some cases the technology, like in our case, to really turn proper waste, really post-consumer wastes into fantastic animal feed, sits in South Africa, where the market doesn't net. And where the market does sit, there isn't the legislation yet. So there's a bit of jigsawing happening over with a legislative play. And the last bit is the bit in the middle, which is, what do your factory cost you? And factories are freaking expensive, big builds. This is a waste to energy business, and there's lots of people playing along with it. Oh, we've invested $2 million in a factory, or we've got $3 million here, or $4. Factories are in the many tens of millions of dollars each for big ones, and scale really drives the output. So, and there are some considerations in there. Labor cost is a part of it. Energy cost is very relevant. We thought we were being very clever in South Africa, because it's nice and warm, and the soldier flies like nice and warm environments. Actually, it's been really hard because specifically in the Western Cape where we are, on a winter's day, it can be 3 or 4 degrees in the morning and 30 degrees at lunchtime. So you're chasing your tail from to try and keep a single temperature on site. Funny enough, I think the easiest place to work would probably be Antarctica because it's just freaking cold outside, and all you have to do is make it 30 degrees and just turn it on. It'd be much easier than everywhere seems easier than where one is. So yeah, those are the 3 bits: the cost of the input, the gain from the gate fee, the ability to sell your output. So the output is a global market, and with the exception of the FRAS, which has a regional theme to it, and then the cost of your bits in the middle. And so I think that's why you're seeing some different things. And some people are really good at some parts of it. Some people are really good at the inbound bit and waste management, like we are. Some people are really good at low technology costs. And some people are probably really good at doing some derivatives from chitin and some special chemicals with high sales value. So I think those need a bit more volume behind them before the market can give you the true prices that you'd be looking for as an engineer, Dave. The real mass balance is the real, where does the dollars match the mass balance in the flows.
Thank you very much. It's a great answer. Answers.
So the cost of the product, how much of a bearing does that have on these huge investments that have been made? For example, the cricket farm in London, Ontario, and the one near Amiens that wine sector just, I mean, they are millions of pounds going into that. And is that based on the expected cost, or if the price varies a lot or comes down, then those huge investments may struggle?
Yeah, I think there's so I'm always reticent to comment on other people's business models. It takes some pioneering, and sure, the prices for sustainable protein will remain high for the foreseeable future. I mean, we can look at all the reports you want and this, that, the other, but ultimately proteins are a scarce resource. People are becoming less scarce on this planet, and there is more demand than there is supply, and so that's probably going to lead to price inflations. The ability to do it without waste transformation, for me, is hard, and that's really where AgriProteins always come. We are a true waste upcycler. Without getting wildly biblical, I don't think anyone would have particularly caught on to any tricks that turn red wine into white wine. And you kind of need to do water into wine, right? So it's you needed to do a transformative step, and turning some sort of low-level animal feed into a high-level animal feed is not that exciting, but turning waste into animal feed is, of course, great. And what defines waste is another question. As I said, in America, you can hog feed swill, which you always used to be able to do in the world, and in Europe you can't now, and in many countries you can't because of BSE fear. So I think that will the hundreds of millions that are going into those big projects pay off? Yes, they will. Will they pay off exactly as the business plan says today? Pretty unlikely. But these are utility plays, and ultimately we need to be thinking utility scale. We just don't have the history of doing this at a utility level yet. And when people plan a new wastewater treatment plant for the Olympic Village in London, it's fine. It's going to cost a freaking ton of money, but it's going to sit there for 40 years and off we go. And they probably depreciate it over more than 40 years because it's just what it does. It costs loads, and there's a solid forever input. And I think that's really what we need to gun towards. There's some, I wouldn't say leaps of faith. In the early days, there was leaps of faith when we got into this, but you have to be a believer. And I certainly am, and the world is waking up to that. And what's not to believe, really? You're taking waste products, you're making nutritional animal feeds out of them, and replicating what's been going on in in nature for millions of years. You know, the old, I was terrible at biology, failed most of my exams at school, but you know, when the apple fell off the tree, decomposed, along comes the fly, lays some eggs, some go in, and the wildfowl come along and scratch it and eat it, and circular economy. And that was before the circular economy was a buzzword. It was just the way it worked.
Can I ask a question on this? I mean, it's this aspect that you would start with a waste, and then you work out what insect would thrive on that, and then what you will do with the insect. I mean, to me, it strikes me as being the right approach, but I don't think that's how the insect industry has grown so far. The starting point was always, I need that protein and I need that insect to produce that protein. Now, what do I feed that insect? And I wonder whether, I mean, is the approach changing? And also, can we, you know, is the market, I wonder if there is enough visibility maybe in the market, or enough appetite in the market to be more open-minded about how you use insect protein, because to start off with waste is different than to start off with a vision for an end product, or with a clear mandate of, I need to produce a protein that can compete with fish meal, or I need to produce a protein that people will eat, you know, in their snacks, whatever.
We've only ever been a nutrient recycler. That's what we really like to call ourselves, right? So that's always for us involved waste.
I think you have, but I'm not sure that the industry as a whole has been. I mean,
no.
Certainly the legislation doesn't allow that approach in a lot of places.
I think so, and I think people have needed to build their technology from their technology and their biological knowledge using non-waste substrates, and it's much easier to build the knowledge using non-waste substrates. When you can go into a storeroom and take a ton of grain or a ton of bran and feed it gently, is much nicer than when half a freaking supermarket arrives on your front door on a Friday night, and it happens to be Christmas and everyone's gone home, but the guy just dumps it anyway. I mean, we've had some really horrible days. And so I think that everybody's business plan has always been to take in, inverted commas, waste. So waste can be pretty clean. It can be leftover cuttings from, even in Europe, you know, there are some real waste streams in Europe if you go to the farms. If you look, the brewers' grains are interesting. They sit somewhere between waste and not. There's a real market for brewers' grains. So
that's the thing. I mean, there is a lot that, you know, a lot of these things already have markets, as for feed, for even for anaerobic digestion. You know, the UK has sort of biomass energy targets, and you know, if you divert those compost streams, they might start getting a bit frustrated.
They might, although, and then that's the lovely thing. I've thoroughly enjoyed working in South Africa, because we have brilliant people there, great solutions, world-class facilities, supportive government, and no subsidies. And if it can work in South Africa, it can pretty much work anywhere else. And the subsidies are wonderful for starting businesses, but they become. I'm a believer in grants and one-off grants, because subsidies create dependencies, and the dependencies that we see that sit around the biogas is pretty meaningful. I don't enjoy knocking anybody else's business model, and we compete at one level for input sources with biogas, and biogas has its place, but you wouldn't want to be feeding anything to biogas plants that you could be feeding elsewhere. The stunning stuff on subsidies, I have to tell you this story because it's the one that always makes me weep. And I'm a real pragmatist. I love doing the right thing for the environment, but my brother is the mentalist in the environmentalist bit, and I'm just a strong environmental person. But we had a very nice retired engineer in Cape Town, and he had all his life dreamt of building a little biodiesel facility in Cape Town. What he did is bigger than a garage. It was probably sort of the size of 8 garages or so. Cute, and you could put old fish and chip oil in one end and it would come out with biodiesel at the other end. And he built this, it's about 5 years ago. And I went to go and see him, about a year later, I said, oh, how's things going? He said, no, he's shut it down. I said, why? He said, because he could buy the used fish oil for R3, I think it was at the time, a litre, and make a product that he could sell for 6. And he said that the marketplace just overnight disappeared because everybody was selling for R5 a litre. And they were selling to a company that was based in the harbour, and they put all the used fish and chip oil from Cape Town in the harbour, and then they shipped it to Hamburg, where they were being paid their subsidies to process used fish and chip oil. And it didn't matter where it came from. And those are the things that scare me, because the environmental impact of carting used oil 10,000 kilometers around the world. So I think subsidies are great, but with massive care need to be used. And I think there is no business model around recycling of nutrients that is better standalone than insect-based.
And how do you make that case, though? I mean, you know, when you have to take on the EU over subsidies, you know, that's quite a fight to pick.
I think they'll disappear. They're starting to disappear already. The biogas last year in Germany, I think I've got the number somewhere. I think it's 250 biogas plants closed last year, and 200 the year before. All the little ones are closing down left, right, and centre that people had on site, because they don't work without the level of subsidy, or without circularity. And I think that's the other thing. That's why real circularity, not just circularity washing, but actually where you really are the farmer, you've got your own waste on site and you're using your gas on site. Great. Those mini circularities work, but otherwise it needs big plays. That's my personal opinion, but that was just...
David, yeah, going back to some of the comments on the capital cost of plants and things, and the amount of investments and things like that. So I spent early career in mining industry, and you know, if you want to move large amounts of rocks and process large amounts of materials, this is the place to know how to do it, and how to do it in a robust way. I get very worried looking at some of the things and some of the trends in the insect industry, in that the technology people are using looks much more like electronics industry, and use of robotics and things like this. And maybe this is an area where I'm out of touch and old school, but the technology being involved in these things just looks really quite high tech. And having spent, you know, a good 20 years as a production manager, dealing with failing equipment and bits and pieces all the time, all of these little electronic bits and pieces and robotic items are very expensive to maintain and are inherently unreliable. So I just love your observation on, particularly coming from South Africa, where mining technology is big, and the cost of high-tech equipment being used in Europe. It just, I've got a lot of questions about that. I'd love your take on some of that.
I will give you my opinion, David. I would love to have a few beers with you and discuss that to the nth degree. That's a really awesome question. It is. So again, there are two very distinct parts to insect processing. The first one is three really. So if we go back to the waste receiving, that's fairly standard. That's big freaking nasty kit. If you're doing it in the way that we do, which is using real waste. So there's an awful lot of churning, big kit, standard stuff that is used, and you wouldn't see it in a mining environment, but it's stuff that's very, it's been used for a long time in biogas, it's been used in waste minimization programs, and great big, dump it in, get some oil off it maybe, and render it and chew it up. So that side is really not high tech. Well, actually, that's unfair, because it's high tech but big, as is the mining industry. It's big solution, heavy equipment, high tech. Let's call it that. Yeah.
Yeah. Then scale. Yeah.
Yeah. guys at printers. Then anything that has got to do with flies, and I say flies specifically, and eggs and neonates, I think you can be very high tech on. Flies weigh nothing. They are extremely light. They are very controlled. It's not a particularly big part of the operation. You've got lots of lights and humidities, and so there's a blend of high-tech counting, I think, that can exist next to fairly standard HPLC type driven HVAC solutions, heat, light, ventilation. So that's the middle zone. And then I think the bit that I would love to discuss with you on a beer is how much do you use in the grow out? And that's really taking a very small larva in your prepared substrate. So the waste has been turned into what we call a larva lunch. And how much technology do you use there? And we use a nice amount of technology, I believe. We have a central bot that fills and fairly standard stuff, and a level of automation, racking automation. One thing that has moved an awful long way, David, in the last 5 years because of Amazon and the like, is the storage and racking technology. It's blown me away, and the cheap and the cost-effective pricing of it. Whereas before, you could just never ever replace one person with a forklift truck that was a good driver, and he or she was moving stuff around, or maybe even 20 forklift truck drivers. The ability for racking solutions to do stuff as well robustly has moved a massive way. Whether it's really ready for it now, we're still just on that cusp of that. We're forklift moving to automated racking systems, and I still like forklifts. But then the dissenters say to me, David, forklift, racking systems don't drive into pillars, which forklift drivers do a lot.
Yeah. And maybe one extra question that this is quite different is, this question comes from my balcony at present, where in my own private attempts to raise black soldier flies, I seem to be able to raise about 20 to 30 different species, not just black soldier flies in the process. And the most irritating of them are a whole pile of different species of mites that I don't have a microscope to look at to see what on earth they are at this point in time. How on earth do you control all of the different species that are growing if you're using a diverse input scheme? So I guess one of my other interesting home studies here is that I will swear that there are at least 10 different species of ants in my kitchen, and they all come to eat something different. And, so if I have corn, this species will come. If I have sugar, this species will come, etc. It's like there's a remarkable range of different insects eat different substrate components. How on earth do you manage that when you're trying for uniformity in a process?
So I've got a perfectly prepared lie to tell you how well we deal with that. So here's the short answer: is that's why we ended up with soldier fly. We started with Musca domestica with house flies, and they are freaking awesome. And we have written the book on how to industrialize the process of housefly. The problem is that they were too quick and too clever for us, and we were too thick and too bad because we couldn't freaking deal with it. You go on Friday night, everything looks fine. You come back Monday morning, it looks like Armageddon in the factory. And it really was disastrous because they were so good at what they did. So then we moved to chloropyga, which is the blowfly, and they're a little bit slower, but they're big as well, and they are awesome. The flies are so easy to deal with, but the larvae are a bit skittish. And also they like liver, and they like stuff left food from abattoirs, and that's got real value. So the waste stream that we thought we were going to be picking up at first, which was abattoir waste, turns out actually goes straight to pet food, except the really shitty stuff. So when they talk about abattoir waste, 90% of it gets sold, and the 10% that's left for free that's problematic to get rid of is yuck. And that's saying yuck, and I work and live in yuck. So and it's also blood is their problem. So we spent quite a while to see if we could feed just blood, and we didn't get that right. It's very hard working with blood. You have to get it very thin so they don't drown, and as soon as you get blood thin, as you'll know from your own cuts and grazes, it oxidizes and becomes hard. So the reason we work with the soldier fly is it's a great grazer. It eats all sorts of stuff, and in fact it eats pretty much anything that's decaying. And you can cut that with anything. There comes a point, so if you've got perfect soldier fly food, you can put 10% of this in there, you can put 10% of that in there, you can put 10% of husks in there. You just need to make sure that you don't keep adding 10% until you've done 10 times 10 and you've only got nothing left of your base. But and so that's how we got to them, because they eat anything. So back to your ants, we don't like things that come in just to eat this one and eat that. We use a broad-based one. Although I do occasionally dream about the idea where you come in to a site with a specific amount of waste, and we say, oh, park your hospital waste over there because there's a hospital fly that eats that lot, and park your human waste over there because there is a shit fly that's what they're actually called, that eats that stuff there. And park that there because there's a poop beetle over there, and park that there. So that's a bit of dream stuff. I love the idea of that sort of industrialized entomology. But the real problem, which I think you were alluding to there, David, was how do you keep down foreign visitors in a factory? And it's basically bloody hard if you let it get out of control. And if you keep it to within sort of 4 or 5% contamination, then the dominant species will wipe out the other ones. So if you've got 95% soldier flies, they'll wipe out the other 5% of pretty much whatever's there. Some of the things that we do, we make specific effort to heat treat some of our substrates on the way in to make sure that we're not, especially fruit in summer, to make sure that we're not bringing in, which we are, of course, until you heat treat it, live and viable eggs in the fruit, because then you are just you're basically just creating another species on site. So we've been through a few of those disasters, and we're pretty much under control. We're not perfect. An outbreak, but very rarely these days, and we can cut it down and highlight where it is, and we have processes in place to be able to basically hive off any part of the factory down to about 1 ton of wet larva that we can effectively throw a net over to stop anything emerging.
David, I had another question for you. How do you square the, the requirement of being able to produce a consistent product with having a very inconsistent waste stream as your substrate? So that's what you were saying about supermarket waste. It's that, unlike manure, which would be really consistent and would ensure that your protein, your fly, your larvae always have X amount of protein in them. How do you ensure that the varied substrate yields a larvae that's always the same amount of fat or protein or whatever? Well, that's the required product for your sort of products after that.
So we're pretty good at that, Emily. We're much better than we used to be. Two things is at scale,
right,
and when you start to know your supply chain, the variability amongst supermarket waste is very little, because it's the same variability every day, if that makes sense. So it becomes homogenized itself. In South Africa, fruit season and harvests make a difference. So we need to watch more seasonally rather than daily.
Okay.
And that brings in a piece of experience. There are a couple of things we can do. We can blend on the way in, which we always check our pHs and our values of our food coming in and the fat quantities in any case, but you can do some blending on the way in, and you can do some product changes on the way out. So if you realize that your larvae have got a greater fat content, you can turn up your defatting machines. And between the controls we have on the inbound and the controls we have on the outbound, we managed to get it possibly more right than wrong, but it ain't perfect.
Can I come in? Sorry, this is Nick Russo. I'm desperately sorry, David. I have to blame my calendar, but I think that's a rubbish excuse. I got the timing completely wrong. I take it you've been having a constructive conversation for over an hour now?
Yeah, I've had a nice deep dive with David and Alan, which has been nice.
All right, well, I did promise you that it would be an hour, not much longer. So if you want to cut it off, that's fine. And
I'm happy to answer the last questions. It is my 29th wedding anniversary today, so I'm going to ditch you all and go off with my wife, although you all seem very nice.
Have you asked about, has anyone commented on the roadmap for the UK, what the possibilities are there? I know that was a question I was going to.
So we're put in on the UK. We started doing some stuff quite early on in the UK. We 2015, 2016, we did some work on a cross-parliamentary novel food focus with the House of Parliament. That was quite fun. And then we joined a thing called the Task and Finish group, which actually does much more than it's not terrible. It's a great group. A terrible name, Task and Finish. I'm not quite sure. It sounds like sort of some sort of dog training camp. And that's a really interesting bunch of British interested folks, ourselves. There's some bit of Zero Waste Scotland, who I really like. They're just an interesting outfit. And some of the Ferrer folks and some good universities in there. And Tesco's and Sainsbury's. There's about 30 of us, I think, and we hook up every quarter and talk about what we could do in terms of driving legislative change in the UK. And we've written one nice white paper, which got taken to right the way up to the very top of the Ministry of Agriculture. It was Mr. Gove at the time, I think it was. And he's obviously hopped off and has a new position now, but there's piece there. And also we are part of another terrible group called Insectrial. I can't even say that without breaking my tongue. Insectrial, which is the new Innovate UK funded drive, which is a big project in the UK to look at the opportunities for the United Kingdom in terms of insects as bioconverters and what would be needed from a legislative change perspective to drive that. And that's quite nice. It's an integrated piece of, specifically the bit that we're working on is an integrated piece of legislative change and carbon emissions opportunities, and how we might be able to beg, steal and borrow some investment money for the sector by being able to contribute to the UK's carbon reduction targets. So it's not, Emily, having spent the last 20 minutes slagging off subsidies, it's not really that, it's just stealing money that's available to make sure that it's on our bandwagon, not on somebody else's.
Oh, okay. That sounds promising. I haven't heard of the insect.
Insectrial, yeah, it's impossible name. But everything that's got a terrible name in the UK seems to do much better than its name, which is good stuff. So.
Okay.
And that's just a standard part of Innovate UK, David. I haven't heard anything of it. So just like the Energy Catalyst program, for example.
It's a freaking enormous grant, David. So we're very careful because we have to go into these things with consortiums. I don't like being the idiot in the room when everyone says, oh, well, how do we do this? And it's like, you know what, we've been doing that for 5 years. I don't want to share with you how we defatten larvae. So I don't like getting involved in those parts of the projects, because either I say, oh, I can't share that with you and I look like a twat, or I say, I don't want to discuss it. So we try and find bits for ourselves that are quite small, that allow us to be in the nuclei of the program. But it's a £10 million project, of which our chunk is 125,000 or something. So it's, you know, it'll give you an idea of where we sit. But there's not very many people. Entercycle the half of that, and they will be building what we call in our terms a PDP, a pre-deployment plants, which is a show and tell site. And again, the reason we didn't want to get involved in that is because we build those all the time, and it's not valid to go and build another one. It needs either new innovation or new ideas for people to be able to build it off their own steam. So we're excited to be working with a great bunch of folks in there, Ferra, and some really great research coming up on FRAS through the university, through Durham University, and on aquaculture with the University of Stirling.
Right, thank you. Well, we can.
It's the biggest ever government investment in insect. Well, and ours is just a little corner, but we're proud to be on the team.
Okay, shall we call it a day then? Thank you
very
David. Much. I think people have got a lot out of it. I look forward to the recording. I'm really sorry again, but hopefully we can catch up another time.
It was really nice. Thanks very much indeed. Very intimate and very cozy, and wish you all a super weekend.
Thank you. Same.
Thank you, and happy anniversary.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.
And